demonstrators largely ignored the warning, spilling into streets, chanting, "Freddie Gray, Michael Brown, shut it down, shut it down." More than 60 people were arrested. Marches were also held in Washington, D.C., Boston and Ferguson, Missouri. Meanwhile, the scene in Baltimore is quieting down after a week-long curfew was declared by Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake on Monday. But what happens next for Maryland and for Black Lives Matter? Joining me now is Maryland's former Lieutenant Governor and former RNC Chairman, Michael Steele. Good to see you, Michael. Thanks for being with us.
It's good to be with you.
So, first, just give me your reaction to this week's and past week's events, the death of Gray, the response to his death so far.
I think in many respects it's been frustration personified. I think the anguish and the anger that has been boiling beneath the surface in Baltimore for quite some time finally erupted. As you know, there were peaceful protests leading up to the violence, and now we have peace again. And I think people are trying to sort that out. The way the government handled it initially was a little haphazard, created confusion. So I think all of this now is settling down into what I hope becomes not just a conversation in the city, but a national conversation about how we move forward to deal with some of the systemic issues that are deeply rooted in communities like Baltimore. When you're living in poverty, when you're living with poor educational facilities, when you're living without job opportunities, when the police in the criminal justice system is sort of built against you, this is what you get ultimately. And this is not, excuse or an explanation for violence, but contextualizing it and understanding it becomes very, very important in how we move forward.
Well, in a lot of the protests, there hasn't been much violence at all. The NYPD protests were largely, the New York protests were largely peaceful. What did you make of the NYPD? Did they go overboard by arresting 60 people in what were largely peaceful protests?
Well, fair warning, right? I think in large measure, look, they're trying to keep order in a city like New York. It's difficult on a good day. And then when you layer on top of that, this type of a protest, if they're trying to contain it and keep it defined, then it's appropriate when people step beyond those bounds. Just because you want to protest doesn't give you license to ignore the regulations of the rules of the road, if you will. You can still have freedom of speech and expression within the limits that the police may set. Stay on the sidewalk. Why do you need to walk in the middle of the street to create other health, hazards and problems for pedestrians and cars and so forth? So I can understand that. With these spontaneous moments where you want to go out and express your support for something or against something. The police have a difficult time containing it. So I'm not put off by that. It just is part of the process, as long as there's no violence and there's no one taking it to the next level.
On Tuesday, President Obama spoke at a press conference about Gray's death. He criticised both the looting that occurred on Monday night as well as the death of yet another young black man. What did you make of the president's remarks?
I thought the president's remarks were profound. I thought they were important, and in many respects, I was sitting there thinking to myself, where has this conversation been? This begins to not only pull back the scab a little bit and get to what I was referring to earlier, those systemic issues, but having the president kind of put it in the context the way he did by saying, look, this is real. This is not made up. This is not some illusion within the black community, I think was very, very important. I've had a lot of folks, white folks in particular, this week say to me, well, I just don't understand how a 16-year-old can be so angry. Well, if you grew up in an environment in which you saw your brothers, your cousins, your uncles and aunts harassed, arrested, and otherwise pursued by the police, if you grew up in an environment where, you live on a row of 17 homes and 14 of them are boarded up and burnt out, that impacts how you look at and how you feel about things. So the president contextualizing that and taking it the way he did, I thought was important and really sort of elevated the conversation as far as I was concerned.
He's copped some criticism, Michael, for using the word thug, and its racial implications. That's been a word that's been bandied around a lot in recent days. There was that shameful interview between Aaron Burnett and one of the council members from Baltimore where he said, look, if you want to call them thugs, why don't you just call them the N-word? What did you make of the president using that word?
Well, look, I'm not going to get hung up on words. This is where we get off cycle. This is where we get out of sync when we start, nitpicking about what a word means. Look, yeah, you may not be a thug, but you may engage in thuggish behavior. So let's just call it that. Let's just call the behavior what it is, and not label the person. Because I may not be a thug. I can be here and sitting in a business suit, then go outside and throw a bottle through a window in my expression of protest. That's thuggish behavior. It may be in the view of some people, but I don't want to get lost on that. We do this all the time. We get tripped up on the tripwires that take us off the conversation. And the way I look at it is, when you're online in a chat, on an article or something, and people are making important points, and then you have that one person who injects something that's not a part of the conversation. Everyone kind of goes off following that rabbit hole. Let's stay out of the rabbit hole. Let's focus on what's really ailing cities like Baltimore and what we can do to correct those problems.
I take your point, but my point is that the focus on the thuggery and on the personal conduct, supposedly, of the protesters themselves is precisely what distracts us from those deeper structural and policy questions that we should be looking at here. I want to take a look at an exchange between Geraldo Rivera and a protester. Just take a look at this.
A black man can raise his voice. A black man can raise his voice, and you don't have to be intimidated. Because I want you and Fox News to get out of Baltimore City. Because you're not here reporting about the boarded up homes and the homeless people under MLK. You're not reporting about the poverty levels up and down North Avenue. 2 years ago, when the 300-man march, and we marched from the top of Hilton to from Hilton and North to Milton and North, you weren't here. But you're here for the black riots that happened, right?
The guy's got a point, doesn't he?
It is a very good point. It is an excellent point, and that is the point. We sensationalize and sort of sit there with our popcorn at night watching these stories unfold, but we weren't there. The media was not there when they marched along North Avenue. They weren't there to tell the story of that same kid in that neighborhood 6 weeks ago, let alone 6 months ago or 6 years ago. So that is really the angst for a lot of African Americans. The media shows up to record when they act out. And then let's contextualize that. So after a great win for a national title, and white college students go out and blow up a city, just burn bonfires everywhere, trashing cars, throwing up stuff. Everyone, oh, isn't that cute? Look, they're so excited. But blacks who are out there protesting and angry, showing their anger about the conditions in which they live, they're thugs. That's also the rub for a lot of folks right now. So that's why I don't like to get hooked up on the words and get down that rabbit hole. I really want to stay focused on what it is we're trying to solve here, because that gentleman is exactly right.
Okay, let's focus on the longer term then. Obama's set up the Ferguson task force. He's got the Justice Department investigating this death and others. What's the next step, in your opinion? What needs to happen?
Well, we wait for the investigations to unfold. They're going to, there are 4 right now, as I understand, that are taking place. We're going to get, we hope to see some type of report that comes out on Friday. The word right now is that the police are not going to release that directly to the public. That may be somewhat problematic for people. I think right now, more than anything else, as much transparency, as much clarity as the mayor, the governor, and the police can put on the table, the better. The more people feel that there is not a miscarriage of justice, but the carrying forward of justice, the better. And so that's what I'm hoping over the next few weeks. And then we'll see whether or not the federal government needs to step in and take it to the next level. But I think these early investigations need to get done. We need to give some context to that, and then we can know where to go from there.
On the question of these early investigations, whenever something like this happens, it always seems that there are competing narratives about exactly what went down. Late last night, the Washington Post reported that a leaked police document says another prisoner in the same van as Gray said that he heard the young man trying to injure himself. Then investigative reporter Jane Miller of WBAL said that the autopsy showed no signs of external injury, and reports from witnesses saying Gray was carried into the van injured. When do you think we get to sort all this out? When do we get an answer?
Well, you've just laid out why these investigations are important and why conjecture and third-party hearsay conversation is not. It is not valuable in the long run. Let's put it in. Let's put it all in the context of what the police are going to release, what the autopsy report shows, and then we'll have a better sense of it. Something happened before he was even placed in that van. You look at the video. This is a young man clearly in pain. This is a young man who cannot walk. So there was a sustained injury before he got in that van. So that part before and certainly subsequent to his placement in the van become very, very important. It's not just pieces that you can go run with and say, this is what happened.